Next to the flood myth, the myth of the dying and resurrected deity and the descent into the underworld is one of the most prevalent myths throughout the entire world since the beginning of recorded history. Now, as I have said before, and if I haven't said before, I'm going to say now, by the time any of these myths were recorded, and of course the earliest ones were recorded in Egypt and Sumeria, they were already ancient. They were no doubt passed down orally for a very long time before they were written down. And of course, writing had to be invented before this could happen. As usual, I am going to start in the beginning, and I am going to work forward into very modern times, because this myth, whoops, there goes a cat, because this myth, I don't want to use the word infiltrates, but it is present in many modern tales. But I want to start with talking about Egypt. In Egypt, the dying and resurrected deity is, of course, Osiris. And you read about this in Byron. Now, the tale of Osiris incorporates other commonalities that you also see in other myths in later times. But first, let's talk about the myth, and then I'll mention some of those. Osiris is killed when his brother Set makes the coffin, which is nothing more than a box. When we hear coffin, we immediately think of something in which to bury people, but a coffin is simply a box. So he makes the box, lures Osiris into it, sets it afloat in the Nile, where it comes to rest in Byblos, where the name of the king escapes me, but the queen's name is Astarte, and of course Astarte is a goddess, a counterpart of Ishtar, even the names are similar, which traces back to Inanna. Now, this is not the goddess Astarte. This is just a queen named Astarte. But Osiris comes to rest there, and Isis goes out to search for him. Now, the search by Isis for Osiris is also incorporated into later myths. When Persephone disappears, Demeter goes in search for her. Now, in the Sumerian/Babylonian tales of Inanna and Ishtar, no one goes in search of Inanna, even though her servant Ninshubar waits for her. And I'm going to talk about Inanna in her own video, so I'm not going to dwell on her too much. Ninshubar doesn't go looking for Inanna, but she does wait for her. But in the Babylonian version of Ishtar, it is Ishtar who descends in search of Tammuz, her consort, her husband Tammuz, who has died and has gone into the underworld. But in the Egyptian myth, Isis goes in search of Osiris. And these are one of the commonalities that I'm going to talk about, not only from the point of view of the search, but what Isis does when she gets to Byblos and finds out that Osiris is there. And what she does is that she takes the son of the king and the queen, and she becomes very, very fond of this little child, this infant, and she wants to make him immortal. And so every night she would pass him through a flame, and that was the process by which a mortal could be made immortal, which is kind of a contradiction, because even the gods weren't mortal. Osiris dies, but it would at least have given this child very long life. This is something that Gilgamesh would have loved to have, because of course Gilgamesh goes on the quest for immortality, and he doesn't get it. Now, later, in the Greek myth of Persephone and Demeter, Demeter goes in search of Persephone after she is abducted by her uncle Hades. And Demeter comes to Eleusis, where the Eleusinian mysteries are later practiced. And she stays at the palace of the king and the queen there, and she becomes very fond of their child, whose name is Demophon. And she passes Demophon through a flame every night to make him immortal. Now, the Greek gods were immortal. some question about whether the Titans were or not, and there's some conflicting news there, but the Greek gods were immortal. So if she had succeeded in making him immortal, then he would have lived forever. However, both Isis and Demeter are interrupted in this process by the mothers of the children who come in and say, "Oh, what are you doing to my baby? You're trying to burn him?" Spoils the process, and the child does not become immortal. And you simply cannot link the commonalities of any other two myths closer than the myth of Isis's search for Osiris and Demeter's search for Persephone. Now, when Isis finds Osiris, she brings him back to life. Now, in the Byron's book, he says that she fanned him with her wings, and Isis is a prototype of an angel. She has wings. And Byron's story says that she fans him and brings him back to life. I have not read that in other myths, but I'm going to trust Byron, and if he says that is a variant myth, then I am going to accept that. The problem with the myth of Osiris and Isis is that we have no one single retelling or recounting of this myth. Everything that we know about it is taken from the coffin text and the pyramid text, and later accounts by Herodotus, who was a Greek historian. But by the time Herodotus got into Egypt, this myth was really ancient. But at any rate, Osiris is brought back to life. Set finds out, cuts him into 14 pieces. Now, I've talked about numbers, at least mentioned numbers before, and how 7 and 3 are both sacred numbers in many myths. Well, he's cut into 14 pieces, which of course is a multiple of 7. Even you knew that. Even we non-math majors know that. And scatters these 14 pieces all over the face of the earth. And then Isis and her sister Nephthys goes in search of these pieces, and they find all of them except for Osiris's phallus, which happens to be eaten by a fish in the Nile, and the Egyptians wouldn't eat that particular fish. They find the pieces, they sew them back together, and then Anubis, who was the god of the dead, performs the ritual or the rite that brings Osiris back to life. However, after Osiris is brought back to life, he cannot remain in the land of the living, and he can't remain there because it would upset the balance of the universe. And so Anubis says to Osiris, "Hey brother, you are more important than I am, so you can be the god of the dead." And that's what happens. Osiris goes into the underworld, becomes the king of the dead, the god of the dead, and Anubis takes, I won't say a subservient post, but certainly takes a post lower than what he had before. But Anubis, who is a jackal-headed god, some people say that it's a dog. Jackal is by far the most common interpretation of Anubis. And of course, dogs remain associated with the underworld in Greek myth with Cerberus, and into Norse myth, Garm, the dog that guards the Norse idea of the underworld, and even into Christianity when they talk about the hound of hell and also the hound of heaven. So Osiris must stay in the underworld. Now, Isis actually conceives of their child Horus after Osiris is dead. I don't know quite how that worked. I'm not going to go into it, but there it is. In essence, Horus is a type of reincarnation of Osiris. And Horus and Set engage in battles. Some say that the battles just kept raging on. Some say that Horus beat Set. But it is the archetypal battle between good and evil. And so that is the Egyptian myth of the dying and resurrected deity and the descent into the afterlife. And of course, remember, Egypt's afterlife was not inside the earth. It was someplace to the west. The west is that way at my house. But there are also other addendums. And whoosh, My thought just went out of my head when I was talking about the West, but it just came back. Osiris's resurrection was important because they embalmed him, and his resurrection and his embalming and him going to Tuat to live meant that humans, if they were properly embalmed and the proper rituals were said over them, they too could be resurrected in Tuat, the land of the dead. They would not be resurrected on earth. They would not be reincarnated. And I know that I have said before, probably in the module on afterlives, that the concept of the modern movie, The Mummy, would have been foreign to the ancient Egyptians, because they would not have embalmed somebody as a punishment, because that meant that person could live again. And to the Egyptians, oblivion and being forgotten was much worse than being embalmed. They would have taken the bones of that person, they would have taken the body of that person, and they would have exposed it so the bones would have been scattered to the far ends of the earth. That was why it was so important for Isis to find all of the parts of Osiris, because he would have had no chance of being resurrected had they not been able to find all of his body parts and reconstruct them. So Osiris gives hope to the Egyptians that they too can have a life in Tuat, in the afterworld. Again, I'm going to discuss Inanna in another video, but we see this in other myths. Now, Shani Spretnak wrote The Lost Goddesses of Early Greece, and though I refer to it, I'm really rather hesitant to use it as an authoritative source, because she's never said where she got her stories. But she presents Persephone as a savior in her own right, and we know that Persephone, aka Cora, was the goddess of the dead before the Aryan Olympians came onto the scene, and that she became goddess of the dead in order to help the lost souls in Hades and give them some type of hope. They were already in Hades, but they were hopeless. She gave them hope. And we also then see this in Christianity, even though Hebrews had a concept of a paradise and Sheol inside the earth, the grave. When Christianity was instituted and Christ died, he gave the hope to his followers that they too could live in paradise, could have an afterlife. Now, the concept of the Egyptian afterlife changed over a period of time. I'm not going to go into that. We've discussed that somewhat. But the hope that the Christian Jesus gives to his followers was the same type of hope that Osiris gave to the Egyptians. There are many, many more dying and resurrected deities, many, many, many more descents into the underworld, but I'm going to stop there and discuss some more later.